future of the Islamic Republic's politics? And would it be accurate to call it the end of the reform movement in Iran and perhaps the beginning of the rise of a new kind of opposition going forward? We have a wonderful panel of three keen observers of Iranian politics on the panel to tell us more about what they see happening in Iran and what it all means for the future of the Islamic Republic. In the interest of time, I will introduce them alphabetically and briefly. You can see their full bios on the website for this event on the pages of the Middle East Institute. First, we have Ali Afshari, who is a political analyst, activist, and former student leader in Iran. Then we have Nazanin Ansari, who is the managing editor of Kayhan London, a news and analysis outlet that publishes in Persian and English with a focus on events in Iran. Last but not least, we have Negar Mortazavi, who's a journalist and a political analyst. Just a few pointers from me before we start. To submit your questions, please use Zoom's Q&A feature, which you can find on your Zoom screens. For those calling in by phone or watching our panel on the live stream, you can ask a question by emailing events@mei.edu. If you have any technical issues, please email events@mei.edu. Do feel free to ask questions at any time throughout the panel. I'll be looking for them and I'll integrate as many questions into the discussions as I can. With that all said, let me welcome our panelists. It's great to see you all. Thank you for joining us. Really keen to hear your thoughts. The way I thought we could do it is I start with Nazanin, I'll go to Negar and then Ali. And I'll ask the three of you the same first question. What do you make of this election process so far in Iran? What's the mood in the country like? Nazanin, why don't you start us?
Well, thank you very much, Alex, for inviting me onto this panel. And let me tell you, I mean, as far as the mood in Iran is concerned, it's extraordinary. It's something that I have not seen since the revolution. And that is, or also 2009. But this time is very different in the sense that it seems that voices that were very isolated, like that of ours in Kayhan, London, they're no longer isolated. It seems that a silence has been broken. And what we are saying is no longer a new thing or something out of the ordinary. Certainly, when you think about when Clubhouse has played an immense role in actually highlighting the issues that are taking place on the ground in Iran. And what we are seeing is very much not only within the opposition, that their voices are getting louder, but also you see a form of kind of frustration, a desperation, sadness within the establishment itself, and confusion. So as you see the voices of the street getting louder, we see more a bit of more mix-up, more as far as strategy is concerned. Certainly, I know we're going to talk about the debates later. A lot of people have not listened to the debates. So we have because it is part of our profession. But the youth are no longer interested, and the issues that have been discussed no longer interest them either. Certainly, one of the biggest issues has been COVID and Corona. We've got the strategy and the execution and the implementation of the strategy as far as prevention and vaccination, all of that, none of it has been discussed. So it is a very different mood this time. I think those of us who have been against the Islamic Republic, certainly I have been since the onset, we are seeing our mouths are open and saying, is this real? Is it that what we are saying is no longer the sole voice, the lone voice? Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Nazanin. Negar, turning to you, I wanted to hear your thoughts as well in terms of what your takeaways are when you look at the sort of feeling of the people. And Nazanin mentioned Clubhouse, and you got these things, the open mics in Iran, and everything that's coming out of the country. well, I shouldn't say everything, but plenty of it suggests a lot of anger and people saying, you know, what difference does it make? So what do you think the country's going in terms of its mood? Is it one of excitement? Is it one of apathy or perhaps even anger?
Well, it's definitely not a very exciting election if you compare it to previous elections of the Islamic Republic, specifically the presidential election every 4 years. It's the most important political event of the country, especially when it's the turn of the presidency. So every 2 terms, every 8 years, I would say, this is supposed to be the most important and consequential political event. And usually you would see some excitement. I have to first mention that elections in Iran have never been free or fair, but they have been competitive. Competitive meaning between the candidates of at least the factions that are permitted to run in the election. But this election seems to be the least competitive of all compared to previous presidential elections of the Islamic Republic. And the central issue here, the key issue about this election is the mass disqualification of candidates by the Guardian Council. It's been unprecedented. The number and the types of candidates, the factions that have been disqualified from running. A current vice president has been disqualified, a former speaker of the parliament, an advisor to the supreme leader, Ali Larijani, top figures within the Islamic Republic, which we have seen in the past. We saw, for example, former President Rafsanjani being disqualified and other figures. But this one, as far as the disqualification, has been unprecedented. That's one of the reasons. There's also crises, multiple crises that the system is dealing with, internal and external. Obviously, there was years of maximum pressure, crippling economic sanctions on the country, and the state of the economy is pretty bad when you speak to Iranians on the ground. Also internally, there was the brutal repression of the November 2019 protests, hundreds killed, if not more, thousands arrested, very harsh sentences landed. And that's something that's very fresh in the psyche of the Iranian public or the voters. The downing of the Ukrainian plane, January 2020, these are crises that haven't been resolved by the system, by the government or the regime. And they're something that have added to the frustration, the anger, as you said, the apathy of the voters. And even when I speak to reformists, people who usually we expect to be active and at least excited around the elections, I feel this apathy and a sense of hopelessness among them as well. And we saw that the coalition of the reformist parties have basically said that they don't have a candidate in this election. They're not straight out boycotting it, but they're not necessarily encouraging mass voters to come out and vote for any of the candidates because they basically had nobody from their faction approved. So it's going to be a very different election to previous elections. But let me just add this final point. Nevertheless, it is still a very consequential election. This election is going to determine the president possibly for the next 8 years in the country. And if Ebrahim Raisi, who is considered the shoo-in candidate for this election, basically the setup seems to be clearing a path to an easy victory for him. If he becomes president, there's also ambitions for beyond presidency and potentially him becoming a successor to the supreme leader. So this election could potentially determine the next 3 decades of the Islamic Republic if this person, in fact, Ebrahim Raisi, becomes president, and then as a result of that, the next supreme leader. We can talk about that later, of course.
Right. No, we'll talk about the presidential debates. We talk about reform later. And before I turn to Ali, I remember in 2005, I was in the streets of Tehran, and I remember I was in that election talking to a number of individuals who were saying they were voting for Mahmoud Ahmadinejad. It surprised me because they didn't seem to come from the sort of backgrounds where I thought they would vote for someone like Ahmadinejad. I asked for the logic, and the logic they gave me was, look, once you give all the power to this hardline faction, then they got nobody else to blame. And I wonder if something similar might happen this time around it. People saying, let's just have Raisi as president. I'm not going to show up and vote. Let him become president. And who are they going to blame? But anyway, before we get into that, what's your take of the mood in Iran this week?
Yeah, thank you, Alex. I'm glad to be here and talk to the people. I agree what the other speakers indicated, and I want to add something that this election, it's opportunity or it's a gate to see a new chapter in terms of the government future behavior and also the people, the majority of the Iranian people behavior. Is that right that the all history of the election, except of the two first elections, the first presidential election and first parliamentary election, people of Iran see is not the election, it's the selection. In this election, it's completely clear and no illusion about that. Before the time, I agree that we had in some election competence, but people have to choose from the people that the Guardian Council from the supervision of the Ayatollah Khamenei place for them, and they don't have no choice out of that. So, but this time it is completely clear that they decided to determine president before election day. And we have seen before the elections that the Muhammad Ali Rajai, Ayatollah Khamenei, Akbar Hashemi, Rafsanjani, exactly they got presidency in the same situation. But now, what's difference? We have unprecedented negative approach toward election. It doesn't matter who will be what's the decision of a Guardian Council. If we look at the all polls and surveys from the independent, from the semi-official, and from the state-run institution, all of them indicated from the couple of months before the Guardian Council made decision, the turnout was lower than 50%. It showed us now for majority of Iranian people, after 24 years failure of hoping to the power of ballot box, they thought that nothing happened to their life. It is very important. So we have now the major boycott and widespread boycott in the presidential election. We haven't had such in before. Now it's like a movement. And we see that so many people from the different political backgrounds, from different cultural orientation, from the different ethnicity, from different parts of Iran, from the different geography of Iran. So because in last two elections that it was quite common that the people in the small cities, in the villages have a different behavior and pattern. But I think in the upcoming election, we will see the same trend for all of them that they reject the election structure of the Islamic Republic. So in continuation of the decline of the reform movement, a reform agenda that it's possible to follow change within the power structure of the Islamic Republic of Iran, I think is gone, it's end. And what Khamenei did for reform is that even he didn't allow that such a person like Ali Larijani from his ally, from his closest circle to participate in that election. It's a blow. It's a fatal blow for the reformist agenda and movement. Now it seems that we have two different separate worlds. People, government. Government is going to continue its agenda, especially for the transition to the next supreme leader, that is going to be maybe Ibrahim Raisi, the other person. They're trying to be more unified with the conservative dominance. And the people also is going to go and follow a radical approach, something similar to the silent revolution or revolution, or something that they focus the change of the structure, constitution, not the ruler.
All right. Thank you, Ali. That some solid points there. I'm sure we get back to the long-term trajectory of the Islamic Republic. But let me ask all three of you the same question again about the presidential debates. I mean, I was just reading Iranian media, and there was some figures coming out of Tehran today suggesting that opinion polls suggest that the turnout rate would be around 40%. Some people have put it, some other surveys, anecdotally, I have to say, have suggested it would be even lower, 30%. But let's just take the 40% or something in that ballpark. I would represent about a 50% drop from the 2017 elections, which I think about 73% people came out to vote, of those eligible to vote. So that's a huge drop in any political model. So if you wanted these presidential debates to excite people to come out and vote in greater numbers for the sake of the legitimacy of the Islamic Republic, well, I don't think that really happened, did it, Nazanin? I mean, were you excited about the debates?
No, because it did not address the issues that really concern Iranians. Number one is COVID, as I said. The management and the execution of the program, the prevention, the vaccination, Mr. Khamenei's banning of any American or Western vaccinations, and then we find out that there are special hospitals where the leaders are being vaccinated with Pfizer. But one thing which is very important is this campaign, viral campaign, No to the Islamic Republic, that has energized the opposition outside and also political figures. Ali mentioned this questioning of the entire foundation of the Islam, of this theocracy. Negar mentioned all the, crisis, the multiple crises that have been created that the Islamic Republic, the regime, is trying to grapple with. These are not crises that was created by the United States. If you've got mismanagement of the country, it is not the problem of the United States. It is the problem of the managers within the country and how to run the country. What is the priority of a nation? I mean, we talk about the nuclear program. Has there been an open debate about this nuclear program? How will it benefit normal, ordinary Iranians? How will it benefit all this billions of dollars are being diverted to a program that, I mean, the one reactor they have, it hasn't even worked properly. So these are the questions, and that is why this election, I mean, Negar talks about the competitiveness of this election, but this is not the question of competitiveness of between one spokesperson of one current favored by Mr. Khamenei or the other favored by the reformists. This is about the livelihood of the people. And for the first time, we're hearing that no to the Islamic Republic. Only last week, there was a conference of over 16 opposition personalities. Now, it's not going to be the last, but they came from various political spectrum, and they all sat together and they all had the same demands. And one mother that had come from Iran, she went as far back as, Cinema Rex, if you remember, before the revolution, the revolutionaries put it on fire and blamed, Sabak, and later on they caught the person, the culprit, and it all became clear. Or later on, the revolutionary justice that happened, not only 1978, 1979, 1988, 1999, the students' movement that Mr. Afshari, in 1997, Iran was at its youngest. Over 70% of the population was below the age 30. And when by 1999, the students asked a simple question about wanting, democracy, the way they attacked them and they burnt the dormitories. But that didn't stop this movement that sputtered then, the discussions, the arguments, the theories, the getting togethers. It's continued. And what we saw in 1999, and afterwards we saw it again in 2009. And I know we're going to discuss the reform movement, but the strength of the 2009 movement the green of it wasn't the Islam.
Nazanin froze just there briefly. Are you coming back, Nazanin?
Text. That was about. Do you have me now? Do you have me now?
You're back. Yeah, we lost you for about
Okay.
10 seconds, but you're back.
Yes. So the 2009, at its apex, it was all kinds of people coming together and going for this movement. But it was obvious it was not going to get anywhere because they started fighting over what kind of a flag. If you have a sun and lion flag, you stand one place. If you have the Islamic Republic flag, they wouldn't come together. This time it is very different.
Right. Thank you, Nazanin. As you said, we'll come back to some of those points that you just raised. Nigar, look, I mean, turning to you on the issue of the presidential debates, these 3 debates that they just held. For our audience, it has to be said that Iran holds probably the world's shortest election season. It's about 3 weeks, if I'm not mistaken. Everything is done fast in terms of when you can register, in terms of when you're told whether you can run or not. And these presidential debates are done within 10 days. So it's done super fast. One has to assume it's done in such a manner to minimize public debate, because the Islamic Republic authorities clearly don't have confidence in themselves. They don't want open debate. They do it fast. They need to have these elections to be able to tell the world that this system is Republican, has legitimacy of the people. But then, Nigar, when you actually look at those 3 presidential debates, I like to ask you, because I was challenged, did you hear any key issues being discussed in any meaningful way? Relations with the United States, the nuclear program, Iran's position on Israel, real corruption that is pervasive in country. And, you know, Raisi, who's been the head of the judiciary for the last 2 years, is sitting there and claiming to be an anti-corruption crusader. What credibility does he have, or the other members of this race, who have all been loyal members essentially of the Islamic Republic since 1979. There's not a single outsider. And as you pointed out, Nigar, even people who are insiders were kept out. So, I mean, does Ayatollah Khamenei and people who advise him really take the level of the Iranian intelligence, the public of Iran's intelligence, to be so limited that they can't see through what's going on here?
So Alex, as you said, it's a super short election season. And for that reason, the events move so quickly. I just got news that there might be some announcements coming out tonight about Hemmati's potential foreign minister or foreign policy advisor. But because of that, also, a lot of things can change until the last minute. So we're still very closely watching what's happening this week in these final days. But let me take you back to 2009, because I think this tradition of televised, live, and challenging debates, like actual debates, is what happened in 2009. And the system, or at least the deep state, the hardcore of the system, as they say in Persian, realized that those debates literally got out of hand. You had Mir Hossein Mousavi and Mehdi Karoubi, the 2 opposition candidates back then, sitting across each other and spending the entire time crossing literally red lines that are set by the government. So we saw that system completely change after 2009. The system realizing, okay, this is not working. There are too many red lines being crossed. Let's create a different setup. And then we came to the Rouhani debates, this format of everybody standing together, sort of not debating each other, but answering the questions of the moderator. But we saw the candidates still taking the opportunity, trying to talk to each other, talk over the moderator, go over their time and make it challenging. So this time, when I look from a media perspective, when I look at the setup of the debate, they're anything but debates. The moderator literally at the beginning of the debate proudly announced that the microphones are not going to be turned on at the same time. So basically, each person will only have their own microphone by themselves, which will automatically cancel any chance of a debate of 2 people. And mics are being cut off at the exact time when the time is over. People are being cut off mid-sentence. There's a lot of show and performance with the moderation, taking questions by random, picking candidates by random, wasting a lot of time with the moderation as opposed to content, that's a setup which comes from the state TV, the IRIB, who is in charge of these debates. But then there's also the candidates, so the people who are in these debates. And we saw that the two main candidates that we are expecting sort of the debate to happen between, which is Ebrahim Raisi from the hardline camp, and then Abdul Nasser Hemmati or Mehralizadeh from the other camp, none of them have a strong sense of debate or speech, something that you even saw in Hassan Rouhani. Hassan Rouhani is a clergy, he's a well-spoken clergy. The issue in that election, in his first election, was the issue of the nuclear deal. He's an expert in nuclear negotiations, and he used a lot of that expertise to attack the other side and to sort of turn that debate to his own benefit. We don't see that much. The moderate candidate is a banker. He's literally a banker. His degree is in economics, Hemmati, and he's been a technocrat in the system, so he's not a well-spoken politician by all means. The reformist candidate, who's sort of a reformist, but the reformists don't consider him their candidate, he's been more radical as far as his slogans and his attacks on the other side, but still it didn't bring that kind of an excitement or the position that you would expect from someone to rise in the debates, as we saw in 2009 or even in 2013. And then Ebrahim Raisi, who is literally the shoo-in candidate, and he's been given every opportunity, be it in the campaign, be it in the debate, to sort of rise to the position that they're trying to craft for him, which is presidency. He's also been very weak, and we saw some of the other hardline candidates, for example, Zakani, literally serving as an attack dog, helping him in attacking his opponents, because it was something that Raisi couldn't do. Neither could he attack enough to rise or defend his own positions. I saw maybe 2 or 3 moments that I would probably remember. There's one moment when Hemmati was speaking about corruption, and he literally got up and he put a paper in front of Raisi's table, and he said, here's a list of 11 corrupt people who have been taking money from the banks. It's been lent to them and they're not returning it. Maybe that's a memorable moment. There's also another slogan that Hemmati keeps repeating, saying the other 4 hardline candidates are to cover. They're pusheshi candidates for Raisi, and they're not real candidates. And we saw Zakani's potential dropout as a testament to that. But other than that, I can't really think of any moments that can go viral or be memorable or, excite the population. For those who are watching the debates, I'm not even sure how many people are watching the debates or following this whole event closely. Not much compared to previous elections, for sure.
No, thank you, Nigar. You're right. I don't think my sense is that it's not getting a lot of viewers out there. And it's Ali, turning to you about the presidential debates. Love to hear your thoughts, but you essentially have Raisi, who's the head of the judiciary, and he's charging Hemmati to be involved in all sorts of corruption. I guess Raisi does have the power to have his running mate here, or not running mate, his opponent here. He could have Hemmati arrested on charges of corruption. There's a comedy element here that people not taking these debates seriously. But what did you make of it?
Yeah, as I talked before, I think the majority of Iranian people decided to not follow the debate. It is the first factors that made this debate unattractive, ineffective, and nothing is significant in the election process. I don't think so that none of the candidates can get something from this debate, these 3 debates. All the 2 semi-official polls in Iran, they did. After each debate, they did a poll, and the majority of that for 37% of the eligible voters watch those debates. It tells us what's the matter. The second factor, it was the format of the debate, because it was a controlled debate, not a free debate, and not an effective manner, because they randomly pick some questions, non-related questions. They don't address the real issue inside Iranian society, And the main question was absent. If a president has enough authority, enough ability to do his task, his or her task or responsibility, that was absent because people of Iran have watched either during the Khamenei's presidency, in Rouhani's presidency, first they gave a lot of promise to Iranian people. But when they started to work and be in the office, they tried to say people, I don't have much and enough authority. The people, I think one of the things that overshadowed this election, that the turnout be at the lowest in the history of the Iranian presidential election, that was the poor performance of the President Rouhani as a mercurial president. People see some political deception, and we see exactly the same in all debates, because those people pretended it was quite interesting that they came from moon, because all of them are the former officials. In their position, none of them, either Hemmati, and I think Hemmati tells a lot of lies in the debates. He was the head of the central bank, and he did nothing about the price for the gas, and that caused that bloody suppress. He was part of the administration. He did nothing to stop the government to misconduct for intervention in a stock market of Iran that lost a lot of properties and monies of people. So it is quite interesting. They didn't take any responsibility for previous work. That was ironic that the Raisi, he was consistently in 4 decades in the judiciary system in Iran. That was the first responsible for the growing corruption, for failure to combating corruption. That person claims that I'm the hero of fighting corruption. So the people of Iran are more smart to believe those lies. And it's also interesting that the President Rouhani indicated in one of his interviews or talks after the debate that, oh wow, suddenly Iranian women become lovely for everyone, and each candidate respect to the women. But the people know that. Mr. Raisi, who was the head of that judiciary, who was a part of the important figures there. What you did for the Iranian women? That they are under so many pressure. And that exactly also is interesting that none of them, either Zaghani from the hardline part of the government, not Qazi Zadeh Hashemi, none of them in those debates tell something for the values of the classic values of Islamic revolution. That's quite interesting. That all of them know that. If they mention that, they lose vote. They have to say something that the protested people wants to hear that. It's quite interesting. Also, these controlled debates in this fake election, in my opinion, shows a failure of discourse of Islamic Republic. It shows the failure of values of Islamic Republic. Either Raisi, that most probably he will be the next supreme leader, he avoid to support publicly in those debates when he needs the vote of people. And finally, I want to say that I heard some few true points in those debates. Abdul Nasser Hemmati couple of times indicated that my main competitor is not the people who are sitting there. It's the people decided to no vote. So he disclosed that the majority of Iranian people, they are not interested to take part in that election. The second right things that Mr. Mehnalizadeh said that the Raisi is too ambitious. His main goal is not to be a president. He wants more. And he has been in the position in the temporary mood. And finally, Mohsen Rezai indicated that the key of the Rouhani promise to the people, it didn't work.
Thank you. Thank you, Ali. Listen, we have about 25 minutes or so left. There are 2 main questions I wanted all of you to sort of tackle for us. One is the fate of the reform movement in Iran. And the other one is what Khamenei's game plan is with this election. I mean, clearly, and I think we all seem to agree that Khamenei has bigger, longer term plans with this election. It's not really about the election outcome, because as we know, nothing really is linked to the election outcome. For example, the nuclear talks in Vienna will continue regardless of this outcome. And they're getting the instructions. Abbas Arafchi in Vienna, the chief nuclear negotiator, he's getting his instructions from the office of the supreme leader, not the presidential palace. So those two questions, the future of the reform movement, and we can do two rounds, and then the other one is Khamenei's game plan. But before I turn to Nazanin and ask her to speculate where the reform movement is going, particularly Nazanin and all of you, comment on what Mohammad Khatami, Mir Hossein Mousavi, Mehdi Karoubi, what they have said in recent days, to vote or not to vote. This is, I think they're not looking good in the eye of the Iranian people. Reform leaders have essentially been betraying the trust that Iranian voters put in them, because they haven't stood up and decided to, been willing to speak openly about what's in the way of genuine political change in Iran, which, as we all know, is the role that the Ayatollah Khamenei and the Revolutionary Guards play. But anyway, Nazanin, to you, tell me, what do you think about the reform movement's leaders and their positioning so far? And then we take that same question for the two as well.
Kayhan London was very much a pro-Khatami newspaper when he first ran for president. And it was only a year or two later that, it became disillusioned just because of what happened. I think part of the reform movement from 2009 was that it really had put limitations on itself, that it would not go beyond certain red lines. And certainly Mr. Rafsanjani at that time, he wanted to create a Shura council instead of having one supreme leader. And certainly when he went to Qom, the Grand Ayatollahs decided, no, this is not what they want to go with. And basically reform finished then. So what happened actually after all the elections and the arrest of the engineers, the managers of the demonstrations in Iran, which they numbered around 1,500, and they really put them in prison. Most of the reformists, they left Iran. And certainly one thing they did achieve was that they were able to change the discourse of the opposition, so that in a way they came and replaced the traditional opposition to the Islamic Republic, which was pro-regime change. But what they did, which was, I think, which has sullied the waters to now, was that their form of regime change always about an external aggression, attack, that it was a way that Iran people are weak, they cannot bring about change, and they will be repressed. And the only way to bring about real change is, either an Iraq style or a Syria style. And we saw those arguments on and on, especially after Iraq and Syria. This threatening that, yes, if it's not the Islamic Republic, your future will be like Syria. And they formed a whole strategy around the forward defense strategy of sending troops to Syria to fight the Syrian democracy activists. Why? Because we want to keep Iran safe from Al-Qaeda and Taliban. It is only now, after so many years, that all the new information has come. People are more aware that, no, it was not about that. Reform was only within the Islamic Republic. Tried, they could not do it. But now, those of them, those who have moved outside, and also those inside, have reached, the genuine ones. That yes, the Islamic Republic, as a state, it cannot function any longer. It cannot deliver the services that the people need. So this is where the reformists are. So you see really the thought leaders and the genuine reformists siding with the No to the Islamic Republic campaign. And where do we go from here? I really hope, I agree with Ali, that as we go forward, I do not agree with Negar. I don't think we will see an Islamic Republic 30 years from now. But what I do see is an Iran that is more open, an Iran that is friends with itself, and a people that are really have the self-confidence to say that, yes, now it is the time to rebuild the country. We cannot wait another year. We cannot wait another 30 years to start rebuilding what needs to be done. For example, you mentioned corruption. Good governance is lacking in Iran. These are things, I know some of the candidates have been talking about FATF, but do you really think if they would sign the FATF, they would be able to remain as they are today? That if they open their books and they see all the financial assistance that is going to terrorist groups everywhere, would they be able to do that? Would they be able to survive accountability and transparency and responsibility? No, I don't think they would. And I think that's why we are at a cusp of a real good change for Iran.
Okay, great. Negar, what do you think? A reform movement, and what you heard Nazanin say, but specifically, what do you think about people like Mohammad Khatami Karoubi? I mean, the idea being that if you don't vote, if you go for general boycott, that you are putting Raisi in place, and then he's going to take Iran in a more dangerous direction. But then, as Nazanin pointed out, I think we all agree, key issues are not decided by the president. So what difference does it make anyway?
Well, I agree key issues are not decided by the president, but the president is not completely powerless. He is one of the top people in power in Iran. We saw the difference, for example, in the era of Mahmoud Ahmadinejad, the 8 years of Mahmoud Ahmadinejad, at least Iran's foreign policy. If we take, for example, the nuclear issue, which is a very important key issue in our discussions in this town, it was very different, the kind of the actual technicalities of the negotiation, the teams that will come for negotiations, and the initial start of the negotiations, and then the final decision making was very different than the 8 years that follow that. So I think there is difference. Obviously, the top person in power is the supreme leader, and the supreme leader hasn't changed in the past 30 years. I hope that what is being predicted is true, but we also hear for the past 40 years the prediction that the Islamic Republic is going to be gone any day or any week or any month or any year, and it just doesn't seem like it's going that way. The brutal repression of any form of anti-government protest is just a testament to the fact that the government or the regime or the deep state, whatever you call it, security forces, the length that they're willing to go to suppress any form of dissent, any opposition, any existential, if existential threat to their power, to their reign. And I'm just not seeing any kind of real path for this kind of change in the complete change in the system that's been talked about. But nevertheless, talking about the reformists, it's a movement, sort of a number of political parties, activists that have lost their power and their influence over the years and have been completely marginalized by the system as well, because they had the support and the popular vote of at least a good portion of the Iranian population, the youth, the urban middle classes, and they slowly and systematically were marginalized, put aside, arrested, harsh prison sentences gave, house arrest. We saw the leaders of the Green Movement, 2009 house arrest, going under house arrest, and then as early as 2013 and then 2017, we saw the reformists basically having to create a coalition or go behind a candidate, Hassan Rouhani, who is not a reformist by any form or shape, literally calling himself a moderate or a centrist. And in this election, we also saw reformists, before the disqualification, we saw the reformists talking about potentially ending up endorsing or rallying behind Ali Larijani, who is not even a moderate by any means in Islamic Republic. He's a conservative. And in the past few years, with his foreign policy views and in his parliament, he's sort of turned more into a centrist in Islamic Republic. But that was a potential candidate that the reformists were talking about. And even he was disqualified because I think one of the reasons was because they saw a potential in him of possibly rallying some votes to create a meaningful competition and threat to this clear, easy victory that they're setting up for Raisi. So they have been weakened, they have been marginalized, and they have been literally by force and also very systematically kicked out of power. But talking also about, let me just mention quickly the statements. We saw Mir Hossein Mousavi and his wife Zahra Rahnavard, still under house arrest for a decade, talking about resisting and basically standing up to what the reformists are essentially calling a coup, an election coup, similar to what happened in 2009. We saw Mohammad Khatami with a softer statement. He doesn't necessarily explicitly say go out and vote in big numbers, but he's saying the society needs hope, needs participation in their own future and things like that. And then we saw a contrast in Mehdi Karoubi, which was interesting, just came out yesterday, where he suggested in order to resist this election coup or the setup that the hardliners are, the structure that they have set up, it's better to go and rally behind a candidate and participate to change the game that wants Raisi to be the ultimate winner. So we've seen some sort of even diversity of views as how the method that they want to go about this election.
Right. Thank you, Nigar. I mean, Ali, turning to you, what Nigar is saying is essentially that if we wait for 4 more years, then Ayatollah Khamenei would put Ibrahim Raisi forward as the reform candidate and expect the Iranians to vote for him. That's the best they can hope for. But on a more serious note, you're a foot soldier in the reform movement. You've seen it from inside. You've seen the excitement on the streets level, and you thought you could bring about change. You were a bit younger back then, youthful, but I'm sure with age, all of us get more cynical. But talk about why you became cynical, because you used to be someone, if I understand it correctly, who believed in elections as a way forward, but you don't believe that anymore. You don't think elections are the way forward. 2 things then I would ask you. What is the alternative? How do you mobilize? How do you seek change? Number 2, we know that the regime used repression against the reform movement. What did the reform leaders, people like Mousavi, Khatami, and Karoubi, and others, what did they get wrong?
Yeah. First of all, Alex, you mentioned right. I was part of the reformist movement in the initial stage. I was part of a few people has convinced Mohammad Khatami to be a candidate, but none of us, either not Mr. Khatami, believed that in that time that he could be a winner of election. The goal, the first goal, the initial goal was in that time that to create a new political identity or promotion of political change. But okay, after 2 years, I was a very active member of that movement also in the first 2 years. But after the students' movement in 1999, and also after beginning the work by the reformist parliament, and in the first months of they started to work, they failed to meet their promise. So I realized in that time, this way doesn't work. And I made a lot of lectures in the Iranian universities, do a lot of interview, and I become active that we need a structural reform. We need to change laws, not the people who are going to be run for the elected bodies. That doesn't work. This balance of power is not in the favor of people who are seeking change. So you know that I was arrested, I was accused that I'm trying to overthrow the Islamic regime, but at that time, that was not in my mind. But after release of the prison and what I see regarding the challenges in 2003, I realized that this system should be changed. But everyone knows that the change of government is not something that everyone can say with certainty that, for example, we can reach in next year, in next 2 years, in next decade, then I decide to pick up that. It's completely different than the participation in the election process, that you have a few choice and you can pick up one of them. So in that time, I joined to the movement that trying to change, the big change, the structural change. Now I think we live in different time, completely different time. The current situation of Iranian society is not similar in past. And now there is a strong ground for the revolutionary approach or a radical reform approach. These two can be work with each other, and nobody can predict what happened in future. But what happened in the election? I don't agree that, for example, the Mr. Rouhani or Zarif, they changed foreign policy. Is not true. If we see the fact that happened, that was in the result of the facing the fight between the US administration and the supreme leader in Iran, supreme leader court in Iran. And Ayatollah Khamenei, who changed his mind. During the Ahmadinejad presidency, he believed because he felt that he's strong, he has enough resources, he moved forward. And also it is very interesting that the nuclear crisis emerged during the Khatami's presidency, not the Ahmadinejad. The first time it was disclosed that they covertly followed the nuclear activities, that was during the Khatami's time. I'm 100% sure that the Khatami didn't know that. The Revolutionary Guard, in the cover of a reformist government, follows the position. So the presidency has no power to stop those people. And also another things that it is very interesting to mention that during the moderator, it's relatively made works. For example, the Zarif is moderator if you compare with Said Jalili. But in absolute definition, he is not moderator. He is moderator of the hardliner. So I think at least in future, we won't have a foreign minister comes outside of Iran in the eyes of the world, says without any shame, a lie, that we don't have political prisoners. And when he challenged, he pretend I'm backed by majority of Iranian people. Because the person who decided to move forward, to compromise or not compromise, to fight with West, is Ayatollah Khamenei, not Zarif, not Jalili. And as you can see, none of the candidates in this debate challenge the current negotiations in Vienna. Mm-hmm. So I want to quickly mention to the other part. So I think what brings that the reformist movement to the end, there is some main challenges, the conceptual challenges. They have problem in theory. It's not possible in the discourse of the Islamic Republic. You can reach to democracy. You can reach to liberal, to the liberalism or to the freedoms for the people. Another one is the moral challenges. Unfortunately, the most of them, when they're in the power, they don't care about the promise they gave to the people. And they just want to seize the power. And also the two more challenges is regarded to the government, the structure of government, the ability of the president, authority of the president, and finally the laws, the structures that, and the power of the supreme leader and his mad authority. That doesn't allow to the elected bodies to work well. For Reformists right now, we see a division. Also, the Mr. Mousavi is a couple of years. He moved away from reformists. He followed the radical approach. But unfortunately, I didn't know how Mr. Karoubi suddenly changed his position and goes to and now he stands in the point, is more conservative than Mr. Khatami. But Khatami seems that so far he refused to actively engage in the election. So if he keep this position, I think there's going to be a change in some of the reformists, and it can be predicted that when they see there is no room for them in the power, maybe they take a relatively more radical stance.
Thank you, Ali. We have about 5 minutes or so left, and I have left my most, I guess, difficult question for last. And here we go. Nazanin, agree or disagree with me, but let's just say most of us assume that Ibrahim Raisi will be the next Iranian president. Not because he has anything to offer, not because he's a great speaker, none of that, just because there is a consensus within the Islamic Republic that he's the man who is best to hang on to power and be there in the presidential palace for the transition for the next supreme leader to take over once Ayatollah Khamenei leaves the stage. Let's say all that happens. So what do you think is Ali Khamenei's calculations? Where is he going with this election? Why?
Well, number one, let's not forget that Mr. Raisi, I mean, I'll go back to Mr. Khatami. Under Mr. Khatami, as a reformist, we had the chain murders of the intellectuals, the writers, university professors. Many of the culprits haven't been found. We had, as well as Ali mentioned, the nuclear program that Mr. Khatami, I'm sure, he's always been within that Council, National Security Council. So I'm not sure whether he did not know, as he claimed he was not aware of the chain murders. Mr. Raisi, I come to Mr. Raisi, who actually has been also implicated in the 1988 murders, and he's already under US sanctions for human rights violations. So where is Mr. Khamenei going? Where he's always wanted to go. He's a leader in head. He is running a theocratic state, which is no longer the Velayat Faqih under Mr. Khomeini, the founder of the Islamic Revolution, but it's the Velayat Faqih Mutlaq. It is basically, it is his say. So where does he want to go? He wants to survive. And the longer he is, certainly, yes, the reform movement failed, they came out, but the course of history is taking us somewhere, that this wave that has started, and I talked about this silence that has been broken, and we hear it on and on. You spoke about, you mentioned the microphones. People go in Iran nowadays, in the, candidates provide these free microphones. Now, people are picking up the microphones and saying, long live Reza Shah, or long live Reza Pahlavi, or down with the Islamic Republic. So times have changed, and I think people are more mature, they're more aware, and they are more proactive, and they're becoming more confident. So this is how it will go. Where Mr. Khamenei wants to go, it's his own decision. Where the Iranian people want to go, that's their decision, and that's where we should look at.
Thank you, Nazla. Negar, your reaction, where does Ayatollah Khamenei, in your view, want to take the country?
Well, it's hard to read. I feel like the deep state is holding their cards very close to their chest, because I still see a rivalry, and within even the hardline camp, with Khamenei being part of that, because we know his son, Mojtaba Khamenei, also has ambitions for becoming a potential successor to himself, to Khamenei. And I'm not sure if Khamenei does or does not want his son to be his successor. There's also the camp of the circle of Mashhad, as they say, with Ibrahim Raisi, his father-in-law, Alam al-Huda, and the potential succession of Ebrahim Raisi. I think once another hardliner, once Ebrahim Raisi, if he becomes the next president, we're going to see more of the divisions within their camp. It's going to be more visible. It's going to come out more, and we'll have more answers than questions as far as the succession. But obviously, I don't see any end to Ayatollah Khamenei's reign until his potential death. Until he will stay the supreme leader until then. And he's trying to set up at least a smooth transition to whoever is the next leader, or a council of leaders, or sometimes talks of a council of leaders. I don't know how possible that would be, but there have been talks, especially when Rafsanjani was still alive. And I think there's a lot of unknowns. Even this election is still unknown. I'm not 100% sure that Raisi will win this Friday, but I guess this election will be a determining factor and make things a lot more clear when a potential hardliner comes into power. We see more of those divisions and realize if Khamenei really wants someone like Raisi to succeed him, or he still wants his own son to be for power to stay basically within the family.
Thank you, Nigar. Ali, we're over time, but I do want you to have a few minutes, a minute or two, please, and react and tell us what you think Khamenei's ultimate plans are. It does make me wonder, you know, Ayatollah Khomeini allegedly believed in elections. There are different accounts, but certainly there was a Republican component to the Islamic Republic in 1979. Today, critics of Ayatollah Khamenei will say he has killed the Republican component for good, and he's turning Iran into his personal caliphate. What do you think Khamenei wants to do?
I don't agree with that assessment. Ayatollah Khomeini killed Republic in Iran in the early years. The early finishing of the presidency of the Abul Hassan Bani Saad, that was sign of that. In reformist movement is another try for establishing republic that failed. So we don't have, because the Islamic Republic is not a republic. It's a kind of a monarchy with a jurist, a religious person as a king. So it's difficult to say something with certainty about the future, but I think Khamenei wants to keep the current position of the government in terms of values, discourse, and political orders for his successor. It is very important for him that an individual or person comes up that he has nothing in revision about anything. So that a few people has that characteristics. So I think the relatively Ebrahim Raisi has more chance. But of course, there is rivalry amongst the circle of power. But after elimination of reformists or something in quotation moderator as a Rouhani administration, out of people such as Ali Larijani, I agree the unified principalists, conservatives running could be temporary. And then we will see another division, another factioning that is repeated in the over history of the Islamic Republic. So I think that, it seems that the government is going to continue his trend. Right. We see that in 2013, they eliminated Mousavi Karoubi with convincing reformists to back Rouhani. And they made they got a miscalculation in that time because they thought that the Rouhani administration is the bridge for them to return to power. But that was not true. In the thought of Ayatollah Khamenei, he was a substitution. And now in 2021, we see that the substitution of those moderators with complete principalists. So I think that this trend goes on, and if there is a division, we see in future amongst principalists, not the returning back of the reformists or moderator.
Thank you.
Let me to add something very quickly. You know that right now amongst the opposition in Iran, the people are protested they have a different slogan. And so some of them, they say something about for the Pahlavi dynasty, but other slogans is they're seeking a form of secular democratic republic for future of Iran. And it is very important that we consider this diversity amongst what the Iranian people is seeking for that. And at the end, that some scientist says that never say never in politics. That all I said today with you, that was my guess, and there is no certainty that they occur in future.
Right. Well, thank you very much, Ali. Unfortunately for the Iranian people, there isn't a secular candidate that believes in the secular republic, as you said, right now in this race. That is not one that they have been offered. I wondered how the individual of that character, political character, would have done, probably very well. But I want to thank you, Ali Afshari, Negar Mortazavi, and Nazanin Ansari for your insights. It seems to me, my takeaway is that reformism in Iran, at least for now, is dead. If the country is going to go in a different direction, it will either come from pressure from the Iranian people inside, with the help of the large Iranian diaspora outside that cares about the old country and wants to see it do well, or perhaps, and this is a big if, that the principalists of the so-called hardline camp decide on their own devices that they need to make some changes. I'm not going to hold my breath on that one. I think they are too used to using their own old instruments to stay in power. With that said, I want to thank you again for your insights. Wonderful to have you come back soon again, and to our audience who watched us today, thank you also very much. Until next time, bye-bye.